Best-selling author James Wesley Rawles. He's written fiction, nonfiction. He's got a lot of amazing insights into things. And, of course, he was also, in Army intelligence. Held a top-secret security clearance with a special background investigation, access-sensitive, compartmentalized information. He was awarded officer, specialty 35A, tactical all-source intelligence officer. I'll go through all of his interesting bio here. He was a captain in Army intelligence, just to give you the short end of it. He'll be with us to talk about preparation for the engineered collapse that the Agenda 21 globalists have been carrying out. But you know that for the last hour plus, I have been beside myself with the fact that capital controls are being implemented on the U.S. And I was told now 3 years ago that John Wayne's family was leaving the country. By John Wayne's, I'm going to just leave it at that. And by countless other wealthy people, powerful people. I talked to a lady who's one of the biggest defense contractor owners in the world, worth billions. She left the country 4 years ago. I've told you about that over and over again. And they said, look, you won't be able to get anything out of the country if you don't leave in the next few years. And that's the word. That's why all the big money people, even the globalists themselves, have been getting their money out of the country and buying armored redoubts or digging in here in the country. And all these elitists are building, these 5, 10, 20, some cases $30 million armored subterranean homes with, machine gun turrets. Why are they doing this? Because they've done a great job at carrying out this Agenda 21 resource war of deindustrializing the West, getting us into debt, signing us onto their derivatives, and getting ready to fully implode the country. And as we slide into depression, they keep telling us everything's fine, everything's fine, everything's wonderful, as the crime rate increases, as all of this happens. But the good news is, between 5 and 7 million, because it varies month to month, previously the record was like 2 million guns in a month, was the record month a few years ago. Now it's over 5 million guns a month. Many big manufacturers have announced they are suspending new orders for 6 months to a year. Small manufacturers are making the same announcement because they're so behind on orders. The government's buying giant armored vehicles, hundreds of millions of rounds a month, 400 and something million this month, 300 million that month, 200 million this month, digging in. They've got the preachers and clergy response teams brainwashing their flocks, submit to government with what's coming, do what you're told, take the shots. Government's now shooting kids up without parental consent. Yeah, again, they're doing whatever they want, and they're announcing, we'll secretly arrest you if we want. We'll disappear you. You're not going to be able to fly out of the country if the IRS says you haven't paid. No judge, no jury. We're going to put you on a no-gun buy list. No judge, no jury, no crime, if you're on the no-fly list. And I've told you for over 10 years, because they were already talking about it even before 9/11, the no-fly list will be expanded to a no-work list, a no-buy-sell list with the digital photo. You'll still be able to use cash, but it'll be connected to a digital photo in all transactions and an internet ID on online purchases, and that's in the Cybersecurity Act they're trying to pass right now. CISPA. I mean, I'm getting chills every 5 seconds now, okay? Because I knew it was all coming. I read it from their own documents, but it is a total banker infiltration of the preachers, the police, the military, the media, the entire culture, and Forbes and Fox. And I've even heard national hosts going, better pay those taxes or you're not going to be able to fly out of the country and go on that vacation. Folks, this is capital controls. This is right out of Nazi Germany, right out of Soviet Russia. I mean, this is one of the big hallmarks. Definition of capital control: any measure taken by a government, central bank, or other regulatory body to limit the flow of foreign capital in and out of domestic economy. But this is even worse. They don't want a grassroots economy, so they're putting a capital control on that. That's why even Forbes said, why are they raiding thousands of lemonade stands? Why are they attacking peaceful protesters? Why? Why are they? Because it's here, folks. As well as market-based forces, capital controls can affect many asset classes, such as equities, bonds, foreign exchange trades. Tight capital controls are often found in developing countries where the capital reserves are lower and more susceptible to volatility. It means when they're devaluing a currency is one of the big ones. Now, that's from Investopedia. That's their definition of it. I have flown and seen it. It's been in the news. I did an interview with a guy. He had 6 silver coins, little ones. Computer programmer. And he was going to Vegas to a coin show. And they weren't even very valuable. He was just going to, trade them and stuff. And I saw them. They were just U.S. silver rounds, worth like $35 at the time. And they were going to take them. So I saw them as I was going through Austin. They're now asking people about their diamond rings, their necklaces. They're downloading people's laptops. This is a prison induction. They're just getting you ready. Now I'm going to shut up and go to our guest. But I'm really freaked out about this because it's passed the Senate. It's now in the House. And the ATF, I was told this a month before the letter went out last year. I was the first to break the letter, just pointing out that we have sources. The ATF is now going to tell people that you can't sell semi-autos anymore. That is, they're discussing it next year. The NRA says they've gotten word that, quote, there's big gun control next year if Obama gets elected. The point is that I was told that they were going to tell people don't sell more than 2 guns to somebody in these 4 western states, Texas to California. And if you do, you've got to call the ATF, as if they don't already have a record of that through NICS. The point is it's getting you used to doing what you're told outside of law. Now, James, I didn't really tell you when I was going to get you on about today. I just wanted to pick your brain about current events and talk about, your research. But being in Army intelligence, seeing what's happening, I talk to military and police. A lot of them are finally waking up. But I see the system creating a cult of the military and the police, who they could care less about, taking their pension funds, you name it, to wear as a mantle around the tyranny. Ahead of trying to start some new civil war in this country. They tried to start the race war with the Trayvon Martin thing, but people aren't buying that. NBC editing the tape, the White House pushing it. I mean, I can just see the volatility. I've just been ranting while you've been on a hold about this IRS capital control and saying they're going to revoke your citizenship, basically, because that's what your passport is symbol of. It's a total right. I don't know of any culture that ever does that. On a case-by-case, for espionage, they take your passport. That's about it. Or when you're already out on bond. So they're saying, basically, you're all prisoners. And, of course, it'll be expanded. James Wesley Rawles, what do you make of this and all the other craziness, sir?
Well, we're living in very dangerous times. And when I saw the news reports about the IRS threatening to take people's passports, actually what popped into my mind was Jonestown and Jim Jones taking away all of the people at the camp's passports and locking them up in a couple of footlockers. We're verging on a society that's a police state at this point. And people need to wake up, and they need to get themselves prepared. If they're going to move overseas, they should take the gap soon. If they're going to hunker down here in the States, they need to get their beans, bullets, and Band-Aids squared away now, because those windows of opportunity are closing.
I hear you. Are you getting chills? I mean, and by chills, I mean, 10 years ago, I would feel the urgency a little bit. Now, it's blowing me away. Well,
the immediacy of it, I think, is almost overwhelming at this point. When I first drafted my first novel, Patriots, back in 1990, 1991, people looked at it as kind of wild speculation. But a lot of it, what was in there, has come to pass. We're living in increasingly dangerous times. We're entering into an age of deception and betrayal by our own government. And people need to recognize that. They need to, if they're not scared right now, they're not paying attention.
Very well said. I know you've got a lot of feelers out. Are you seeing people in the system starting to wake up like I am?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I have consulting clients right now that actually, are mid-level and low-level employees in national intelligence agencies, in the FBI, and amongst defense contractors and retiring military personnel. And they're looking for me for advice on where they should relocate. There's a lot of anxiety
God.
inside and outside of the government right now.
Oh, God. But you know what's so nasty is it's not just some boss hog that wants to rob everything. These globalists are really nasty. They want to hurt people.
Well, yeah, they made it very clear that the whole concept of national sovereignty is essentially out the window, that you no longer have the freedom to travel, you no longer have any banking privacy, and if the internationalists have it, the globalists have it their way, they'll take away our right to keep and bear arms as well. As you've mentioned many times, there's a large push underway at the supranational level for the Small Arms and Light Weapons Treaty, which, if enacted, would essentially erase our Second Amendment.
And they've said that treaties supersede the Constitution, which, of course, on record they don't, but they just lie and say that, kind of like they say the Second Amendment's a privilege or traveling's a privilege. You know, Corzine stealing billions, getting caught lying and not getting in trouble. I mean, they really are just trying to break our will right now. And how do you fight back against this type of infiltration? How do you fight back against such a long-term, patient game now about to come to fruition? I know we preemptively exposed them decades ago. You did, and others did. And that gives us...
It bought us some time, yes, but unfortunately, we are approaching the end game. And at this point, while I do recommend that people remain politically active, at this point, it's time to hunker down. It's time for individual families to team up with like-minded friends, pick out a defendable piece of land with plentiful water and good topsoil, and be ready to just ride out the storm, because it's coming.
All right, you've got the floor. Break down, because, again, I didn't read your novel till the mid-'90s, late '90s, '96, '97, and it even had contemporary characters in it, like, you know, Mark Kornke and people. Totally blew me away. And, you know, what a collapse would look like, what an Agenda 21 would look like. You broke down, basically, and people say, well, why do they want to wreck it? Because they want to wreck it to try to consolidate it, and they risk overheating it too much and losing control.
Right.
But break down what you see happening, the scenarios you see unfolding, some of the different breaks there, how this could go in different directions.
Well, I think in the near future, we're likely to see, as you've mentioned, a derivatives collapse, and the counterparty risk there is huge. It's almost incalculable, because the number of derivatives that are in play measure in the hundreds of trillions of dollars. There's more derivatives in play than there is currency in the whole world. There's the economic risk is huge. If we see a repeat of the 2008 credit collapse, which is quite likely, there very well could be a banking collapse. There could be a stock market collapse, a collapse of the bond market. It could just be a house of cards coming down. There's a whole cascade of events that could bring our economy to its knees and bring commerce to a screeching halt. And as I've mentioned many times before, the crucial linchpin to watch is the power grid. If the power grid stays up, we may still have some semblance of order, but if the grid goes down, that will be the situation where the power brokers have basically lost control of their engineered collapse, and everyone's going to be in the same boat. We'll be in a massive die-off situation where literally more than half the population of the country could die over the course of one winter.
Oh, God. And by the way, the globalists have collapsed Argentina, and if that wasn't a warm area, they would have had, some say, millions of dead. I mean, it was doctors for years eating out of trash bins. It's still happening down there. And just to interject something, when you talk about the controlled collapse, why are they at the same time buying up and shutting down power plants to make bigger profits for the ones they control? And causing blackouts. It's like they can't even, the elite have a plan, but they're so greedy, they're even destroying their own future. Do you see what I'm saying?
Well, yeah. Well, unfortunately, the elitists have bought into the whole green revolution idea. But when you take the green revolution to its logical conclusion, you end up with people freezing in the dark, because you cut off virtually every power source, and the few that are left, like solar and wind power, are unreliable in terms of providing 24-hour-a-day grid power. If you get rid of all the coal-fired plants, all the hydro dams because they're killing little fishies, and get rid of all the natural gas-powered plants, all that leaves you with is solar and wind. And that's great when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing, but it gives you nothing when the conditions aren't right. So we're going to end up in a third world situation where power is unreliable, and people need to be prepared to make their own power and get themselves in a situation where if there's disruption of grid power, for example, I recommend people buy propane powered chest freezers rather than electric chest freezers, because I think the power is going to be so unreliable. We may have power failures that go on for not days but weeks, and if there's, of course, a total grid collapse, all bets are off.
And the government's been saying get ready for rolling blackouts. This is part of the new freedom. I just want to plug here that if people go to Infowars.com, they can get Survivors by James Wesley Rawles. All the orders get a free citizen rule book with it. Also, Strategic Relocation, North American Guide to Safe Places, 3rd edition, incredibly valuable information.
Yeah, Joel Scalz's book is fantastic. I highly recommend that book.
And then also to understand why they're doing this, Behind the Green Mask, You and Agenda 21, Rosa Corey, excellent, all available. You know, it's buoying, though, James, to see the city council woman in Houston trying to veto land grabs under Agenda 21 and saying it's Agenda 21. Again, there is an awakening. Please continue.
Yes, people are definitely waking up, and it's encouraging to see things like the Ron Paul campaign, for example. It's encouraging to see all of the free exchange of information that's going on the Internet, and I think that's one reason why there's all this talk of clamping down on the Internet is it has the Agenda 21 crowd running scared, because when you shine a light on this, it's like turning a light on in a apartment and having the cockroaches go scurrying. We're in a situation now where there's such a fast exchange of information on the Internet that it's essentially unstoppable. And unless they're able to control access to the Internet and track people on the Internet and clamp down on dark nets and people using VPN, for example, they basically can't, the genie is out of the bottle. They can't stop individual liberty unless they completely shut down the Internet, which at this point is impossible. So people are waking up. I'm glad to see so many grassroots organizations forming, and I'm glad to see people training and teaming up and preparing for the dark days ahead, because things could get very, very bad before they get better. And I think it's important that people team up. They've got to be in the right place at the right time with the right friends to get through this. And if people aren't thinking in those terms, if they aren't thinking strategically, then they're just going to end up another statistic, and they're just going to be another refugee on the road. And if the 20th century taught us anything, it's the life of a refugee is nasty, brutish, and short. You don't want to be a refugee. You want to plan your out now. People should relocate. Just previously you mentioned Joel Scalz's book, Strategic Relocation. That's a fantastic book, and I highly recommend it because it gets people thinking along the lines of strategically putting themselves where they need to be for the dark times ahead. People need to make those moves now. You can't get out of Dodge at the 11th hour. I noticed that you started doing some of your videos from home, and I encourage that because people have to think about strictly operating out of their homes, hunkering down for extended periods of time, because there may come a time in the very near future where it simply isn't safe to commute into the big city. People have to think in terms of hunkering down, living self-sufficiently as much as possible, making their own power, pumping their own water up out of the ground, growing their own food, raising their own livestock, and providing for their own security, because all those systems, if we depend on others for them, are probably going to be going away. And anyone who's not prepared to face that new paradigm is going to become a statistic.
Now, I want to raise this point to you, and we're going to go to break here in a moment and come back, but start answering it now. Again, you don't toot your own horn, but you were almost 2 decades ago able to foresee much of what is now unfolding. And you even predicted the time frame with great accuracy. I know the future is fluid. There's different futures there depending on what we do. But seeing the awakening, tracking its trajectory versus the tyrant's trajectory, A, what do you think the future holds if you had to give us a general dead reckoning analysis, A, and then B, how do we change that analysis from what you currently see?
Well, I think I can foresee an economic collapse regardless of what anyone does at this point, because the level of debt that's built up globally has gotten so large that it's absolutely unsustainable under a traditional interest-based debt economy for those debts to be repaid. It's mathematically impossible. So I think we're going to see a global economic collapse, and the severity of it depends on a number of different things.
Stay there. Let's come back and then see how you see all of that interacting within the collapse. How does it run from bad to worse? How do we get ready with James Wesley Rawles? Stay with us. You better believe it. You know, I've had these liners for like 17 years, different variants of, we're in a war. The war is now, leading a frontal assault, info war. Listen, this is real, okay? The globalists want to deindustrialize the planet and have giant throngs of poor people that they control. Then in all their major public documents, they say they're going to release bioweapons after that. And, I mean, Dick Cheney wrote in the PNAC document in 2000, September 20th, that they need to use the media to promote and legitimize the use of race-specific bioweapons. That means killing certain groups of people with a bioweapon, where you release it and all Northern Europeans die, or all Arabs die, or all Chinese die. You're like, well, they can't tailor it just to Chinese. Yeah, they can. They've got it where it would, they've got these genomes so targeted where it will kill the dominant Chinese genetic line and not even kill the Japanese. They've got them so tailored they can kill Arabs of certain derivations and not kill Jews. And Dick Cheney says we need to use the media to legitimize this. That's what it is when they've got all these movies and TV shows. I mean, I already knew this, but they had a C-SPAN event like 5 years ago where Homeland Security threw a party for some of the people from 24 and said, thank you for working with us. You've really helped get our image up and, you know, helped promote taking the gloves off and torture, basically. They said taking the gloves off. Secret arrest, torture, disappearing, internal checkpoints. Cops watch this, the weak-minded ones, military and others, and start fantasizing. But because most of them are too professional, they create TSA, which is now on the highways. They always create a goon force that doesn't go through the original academies that have enough pride to not teach absolute tyranny. You have to twist somebody that came out of the FBI system or out of the state police academy. You don't have to twist a TSA. But I'm ranting. Our guest is here. Every time I get him on, he gets me thinking, and I run on at the mouth. James Wesley Rawles has been an enthusiastic survivalist since his teenage years. He is now a survivalist author and lecturer and the editor of survivalblog.com, one of the biggest out there, survivalblog.com. He has a Bachelor of Arts degree from San Jose State University, minor degree in military science history and military history, a former U.S. Army intelligence officer who was a captain and attended all the big specialized spy schools. We'll just leave it at that. But he joins us here. I just want to plug, you support the broadcast and what we're doing, and you get vital information. You may think you know it all. Reading these books will make you get deeper into the thought process and then pass it on, pay it forward to others. Behind the Green Mask, 170-something pages. Let me give you the technical on that because I'm going to go from memory here. Yep, 168 pages. 168 pages, give it to city council, county commissioners. A lot of times when we call some city council person fighting tyranny, they're a listener or somebody gave them my film. They don't believe it. They go look at it. They find out it's true. Every city council member in your area needs to get this book, and we've got it discounted at Infowars.com. Everybody needs to read Survivors, James Wesley Rawles' new bestseller book. Everybody needs to get Strategic Relocation with all the documents, maps, color, photos. I mean, this is a must-have available at Infowars.com. We're going to get Joel on for a couple hours on the Nightly News soon to do a whole special on this. I want to get a bunch of graphics and production ready before we do it. It may be next week. The point is, win, win, win. Get the information, spread it around to others, and support us financially and the authors and researchers, Infowars.com. Or call 888-253-3139 if you want to call an order or have any questions, 888-253-3139. Or you can write to us at P.O. Box 19549, Austin, Texas, 78760. All right. I get angry knowing this is coming down, okay? I mean, I believe everything I'm saying and more because I can't even articulate what I know and understand. That's why I tend to blow up, because I'm sick of it. And I'm tired of the public being simple-minded and not wanting to understand things or coming back with canned responses. The globalists are digging in. The government is digging in. The bankers who did this are all digging into armored redoubts on record. Okay? Armored keeps. I shouldn't even be here. I've moved out to the country, got a well, trying to put solar in. Don't even have time to mess with it because I'm always down here. I've got to get communications equipment in. I've got to get ham radio stuff in and learn how to use it. I got some of it. I've got to create, but I can't do everything is the point. I've got to do the basics. Firearms, ammo, training, food, medical supplies, most importantly, friends. But we're going to get into, if you can stay a little bit in the next hour, we'll do 20 minutes or so on solutions, James, and take a few calls, and some of the basics that you write about at your survivalblog.com. But let's expand here for a moment into my question that I just posed in the last segment. Is the collapse coming? You said yes. What are the severities from your research? And again, how do you see it shaking out? How do you see the collision being like? How bad will it be? See, because people don't know. 7 million people, major universities estimate, starved to death or died from complications of malnutrition during the 10 years, roughly, of the Great Depression. Look it up, folks. Just type in 7 million died during Great Depression. Major university studies. They kept it quiet. 90% were semi-self-sufficient. Now we're 89% city, 11% rural. Only half of that, 5.5% or so, are self-sufficient. And what's going to happen is the government is preparing to come in and basically commandeer stuff. But they don't have the infrastructure. And people are going to start fighting back. You're going to be called terrorist. Once you're called terrorist, so what? I mean, what is the probability of massive bloodshed when the Fed boys come around with their armored war wags trying to, pilfer the women? Go ahead.
Well, it's hard to say what the severity of it will be. We definitely have a economic collapse coming. At the near end of the spectrum would be a repeat of the Depression of the 1930s, but as you mentioned, we live in a society that's far less self-sufficient and far more technologically dependent than the society of the 1930s, so that even with just a repeat of the Depression of the 30s, we're going to see quite a bit of loss of life. The far end of the spectrum would be a total collapse. If the situation just snowballing completely out of control. If power grids go down, and there's actually 3 grids, they go down, all bets are off. If the grids go down, we could see the cities running out of drinking water and within 72 hours.
The reactors are going to start melting down. They can't even keep it from melting down now. Society's so degenerate.
Yeah, that's the other wild card in the whole situation is not the reactors themselves, but it's more the cooling ponds that are at risk. Part of the environmental regulations and one of the things that the Green Revolution brought us was all this foot dragging about Yucca Mountain and a safe place to store spent nuclear fuel rods. So for the last 15 years, all those spent rods have been building up and building up and building up right at the reactor sites in these enormous spent fuel cooling ponds. Well, the ponds have such a high density of spent fuel in them now that they require constant replenishment of cool water from outside, or they boil off. And once the ponds boil off, they'll melt down just like at Fukushima. Well, Well, that's the case for reactors all the way from coast to coast. And one of the reasons that I stress moving to the inland Northwest states is that we're upwind of most of the nuclear power plants. Anyone who's downwind, they better think in terms of having a home fallout shelter, because we could have unintentional fallout coming from all of these nuclear fuel ponds that melt down. There's so many risks out there, they're almost impossible to count. And it's a cascade of risks. There's a cascade of events if the power grid goes down. The 18-wheel trucks are not going to be rolling. The nuclear power plants are going to be failing, and their cooling ponds will be melting down. We're going to see all the automated reordering systems for virtually every aspect of our modern commerce will come to a screeching halt because it's all computer controlled.
And then people say, oh, Alex, just interrupt briefly. People say, oh, Alex, or oh, Wesley, the reactors have their own power. If stuff's failing down the line, they can only send massive amounts of power. They can't sit there and fire the plant up and use the little bit they need to keep the plant going. See, people don't realize how complex this stuff is and how it's very finely tuned, all of it. And now the society's crumbling so fast that they can't even find good managers to keep trains working right. Reactors are rotting. I mean, really, humanity has just turned into a bunch of jellyfish.
Yeah, the level of complexity that exists now, it keeps growing. It keeps growing year by year. The latest on the power grids is there's an effort right now to do an intertie between the eastern grid, the western grid, and the Texas grid. So even if one grid were to stay up, if they do this intertie, all the grids will collapse simultaneously. The level of complexity keeps going up year after year. The level of interdependence of these systems keeps going up. So the level of vulnerability keeps going up year after year. It's really a wonder we haven't seen a large-scale grid collapse already. And when you take outside factors into play, not just the grid itself and its complexity, but things like EMP or things like solar flares, you could very well have a situation where the grid could go down and stay down.
All right, specifically, the financial collapse is going to cause massive crime increase. We're already seeing it. How is that going to affect things? And when you talk about refugees on the road, break that down.
Well, basically, all the urban areas will be total write-offs, and the suburbs are going to get swarmed by refugees from the urban areas. There will be so many people that find their urban and suburban homes uninhabitable that there'll be a huge number of refugees. Once the water no longer magically comes out of the tap and the lights don't magically come on when you flip the switch and the toilets don't flush, your typical urban apartment building is going to be absolutely uninhabitable. It'll be a public health nightmare. We'll have refugees on the road within just a few days. And if you look at it demographically, we now have 2% of the population feeding the other 98%. Well, what happens to the farmers that live fairly close to the suburbs? They're going to get swarmed. So suddenly, we're going to be a situation where even if farmers are still producing, how are they going to get their crops to market? How are they going to live in safety to be even feel safe running trucks and tractors and their farm equipment or taking care of their livestock?
And the globalists are going to show up after all this collapse and bring in collectivism to, quote, fix it. And we're going to have all of the people from the cities telling us that we've got to share with them and that we're their slaves, and the government's going to hand them machine guns. That's probably what's going to happen.
Yes, that very well could be. If you look at politics, I mean, just look at what happened with the collectivism in Stalinism and what happened to the kulaks in Siberia and in the Ukraine in the 1920s, 1930s, and 1940s. There was depopulation because they tried to implement collectivism. People rebelled. Anyone who hid their crops was treated as a traitor and shot on site, and then they ended up having killed the people who knew how to produce things. And they ended up with a downward spiral. We could very well see the same situation in our country, but the situation would be even worse because, again, we have only 2% of the population feeding the other 98%. The people that have the know-how to feed America, it's a fairly small number of people. If we end up in a societal collapse situation, people are going to end up, eating the golden goose, basically.
Let me ask you this question. It wouldn't be the first time it's happened in history. In your own mind, personally, when do you decide to take action defensively? I mean, people are climbing over your fence, over your wall. Come on, give us food. We need it. And then you're like, you owe it to us. And they pull a shotgun out. Or the local cops under Homeland pull up and demand house to house, give us your storable food.
If it comes down to that, you're in a very dicey situation. If it's a situation with looters, I would predict that in the majority of situations, if you start cranking off a few rounds over the heads of looters, they're going to go find somebody else to go loot. They'll find a softer target. If you come up against your own local government, that's a very sticky situation and one that's almost imponderable. All I can say is don't put all your eggs in one basket. You need to have food cached in several different places, preferably underground, so that if somebody comes and takes part of it, they're not going to get all of it.
Yeah, I'm not telling people what they should do, but at the point that government, which we're used to, robbing us 100 different ways, is trying to... My point is, if they come and want to take food or something, that's one issue. The minute anybody tries to take my family, or we're taking you into custody because the Homeland says, you cannot go to that horrible, sprawling prison structure they're going to have, because it's going to be run and peopled by bestial perverts that like to inhabit such facilities.
Yeah, the last thing you want to be is either a refugee or prisoner in a situation like that. All I can say is people need to be able to stand their ground. They need to plan in advance and think through the situations of when they'll, basically a fight or flight decision, when you're going to flee your property, when you're going to stand your ground. But the last thing you want to do is end up either a refugee on the road or some guy in the back of a truck with a bag over your head with cable ties around your wrists heading off to points unknown.
And they've certainly, talking to people in the government, what percentage are hardcore, psycho types that are really looking forward to all this? Because from my research, most of them are actually overall good people. They've just been naive. They now know this is real. I don't think a lot of them are actually going to follow the orders. I think they'll have some well-publicized events to make the mercenaries look like victims. They're going to try to use mercenaries in a lot of cases. I don't think they're going to have the muscle early on to do this. I see it as deep into the collapse. Then the reorganizational government comes in.
Right, and that's the scenario I put forth in my novel, Patriots, and its sequel, Survivors, and the next one that's coming out in September is called Founders. That's basically the situation I put forth there, where there was a collapse and then a power vacuum that was filled primarily by foreign mercenaries. It's difficult to predict what will happen, but all I can say is people need to think these things through and take action. They need to stock up now. They need to team up with their like-minded friends and neighbors and fellow church congregants and plan and cross-train and get ready.
All right, stay there. By the way, I didn't even know you had a new book coming out, but see, it's reality-based, so I could guess it. I guess it's the foreign UN mercs versus the new founders of the new republic. Am I right? We'll find out when we get back. Straight ahead. Our guest will be with us about 20 minutes into the next hour to get into some practical solutions, some basics of where to start. I hope we're wrong about all this, but unfortunately we're not. The question is just how bad will it get? We're just hoping for just a regular depression, but with this spoiled population, not everybody, but certain elements, it's going to be nasty. The toll-free number to join us is 800-259-9231. Specific questions for the author of Survivors, a novel of the coming collapse. He's got another one, Founders, coming out, and he said I did basically guess a little bit of the plot correctly, but that's in September. We'll obviously have to have him up if we're still around then. But 800-259-9231. Mike Adams is going to be popping in the last 15 minutes of the show or so, I believe. We get that set up because he's got breaking news. It's at Infowars.com and naturalnews.com. Remember, the UN model to shut down small farms is to say your pigs and cows are invasive. It's not a certified, big agri facility. So they announced all these dozens of old breeds. If they have red hair, black hair, spots, whatever, or any other feature, government is going to have, quote, armed raids, arrest you, and kill them, calling it a feral hog problem. It's hundreds of years of hogs getting out, interbreeding, and just going wild. I've shot probably 20 of them or more. I mean, we've got a family ranch infested with them. But that's not our pigs. We used to raise regular pigs out there, the regular old pink ones and others. I forget all the names of them. The point is that now they take that and use it as a way to create a new revenue. People said, oh, they're not going to go on farms and kill them. Don't be a fearmonger. It's happened. Michigan government unleashes armed raids on small pig farmers, forces farmer to shoot all his own pigs. Armed raids. It's all happening. It's at Infowars.com right now by Mike Adams. I want to get into some solutions real quicker with you, but what do you make of the harassment, the animal ID, premises ID, which then Big Agra is exempt from?
Yeah, it all ties back to the NAIS, which is the National Animal Identification System, which was an abortive system they tried setting up several years ago, but they never really quit. They basically are doing the same thing and calling it a different name. And you're right, they will be exempting the major producers. Same thing, by the way, is in the works right now. There's calls for veterinary medicines to be restricted to only being released by prescription, and that's going to make life difficult for small farmers, and of course for anyone who's preparedness-minded, who's laid in a supply of inexpensive animal antibiotics to use in the event of a societal collapse. Well, that supply will be going away. And, of course, yeah, they'll probably exempt major producers. I recently wrote about that in my blog.
Yeah, they're going to turn the DEA loose, basically, federal goons. I mean, everybody knows you're running even 100 head of cattle. You've got antibiotics. You've got other shots you've got to give them. You buy it from the vet. You're not doing that anymore.
Yeah, of course, it'll just be the small producers that they clamp down on. They'll exempt the major producers and say, oh, well, you won't require a veterinarian prescription. But for anybody who has just a few cows or a few sheep or a few goats, then you're going to be behind the eight ball.
And they're the ones that lobby for it. Just last year, $15 million was spent in 1 week trying to put the Safe Food Act through, which was written by Big Agra to shut down where you can't even pick strawberries and serve them to your neighbor. I mean, just total tyranny.
As I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, we are living in the age of deception and betrayal.
We're just a bunch of cold-blooded multinational corporations that are monopoly men in an anti-free market saying, turn this place into a prison. If it isn't bought from our big box store, it's shut down. And the FBI and the rest of the government's like, yes, sir. We'll be back in 60 seconds with some solutions and your calls. It's all just crazy. Whatever tyrannical governments have done in the past, the crooks that run ours are taking it, dusting it off, updating it, and using it. It's just we've got cancer as a country and as a world. It's called the New World Order. 1776 worldwide is the solution. We have James Wesley Rawles, best-selling author, our guest. We're going to go to your calls in the next segment. Let's get into a few practical basics people can do now. Because the most common call I get is, I live in a city. I make, $12 an hour. My wife does. We got a comfortable blue-collar existence, but that's it. We don't have money for anything. What do we do?
Well, I recommend that people reorder their budget priorities. It's time for people to do away with their cable TV subscription. It's time for them to sell their flat-screen television, sell their jet ski, get back to the basics. Try to work down your debt and stock up on all the basics. All your staple foods, get a good, reliable weapon, practice with it, train with it to the best of your ability. If you can't afford to go to a top-flight school like Front Sight or Gun Sight or Thunder Ranch, then at least get training locally through your local NRA affiliate. Get involved with the Appleseed program. They offer excellent training. But get your basics squared away. If you don't have a 6-month supply of your family, of food for your family squared away, you're behind the power curve. If you don't have the money for that, you need to sell your Hummel collection, sell your stamp collection, whatever it takes. Skip taking your vacation this year and reprioritize your budget and get those basics squared away. Get a good quality water filter. Make arrangements to, if you live in a typical suburban house, to set up your downspouts so you can capture rainwater off your roof. Get squared away with non-hybrid gardening seeds. If you don't have fencing to keep deer out, get the fencing in. You're going to have to plan through all these different things to be ready for the tough times ahead.
And by the way, like you said, you can do the rainwater thing into barrels incredibly inexpensively. And I've got a rainwater collection system. It's just incredibly good water. Comes off my metal roof into it. I've got great water.
Yeah, I highly recommend that. And for anyone who lives out in West Texas, for example, who lives in a fairly arid area, if you don't have photovoltaics and are set up to pump water from a well with that, 6 months out of the year, you're going to be out of luck. So it's important that people get those things squared away. And the available supplies on these things are actually fairly thin. The number of companies that do long-term storage food, there's just a handful of them. If the demand were to double, and instead of 1% of the population preparing, 2% prepared, the long-term storage food manufacturers could be completely overwhelmed.
And that's starting to already happen.
Yeah, and ditto, though, for people who make photovoltaics. There just aren't enough companies out there and enough panels on hand. And unfortunately, most of the systems that are going in right now are grid-tied systems that can't revert to standalone operation because people are sucking from the government teat and they want their tax deduction, and they can only do that with a grid-tied system.
And notice, government only gives you a tax deduction when you tie into them.
Right. So people need to, reprioritize their budgets, sell off the frippery, and get those beans, bullets, and Band-Aids squared away. I have a lot of details at my blog site, again, at survivalblog.com. All the archives are available free of charge. Just dig in and team up with like-minded people.
Exactly. Stay there. Back in 3 minutes. Mike Adams is popping in with the Agenda 21 attack on your farm animals, calling them invasive species. Armed men show up for just regular breeds of pigs, shoot them, and then give you giant fines or arrest you. No warrants, no nothing. All confirmed at Infowars.com right now. Top story. Mike Adams is going to be popping in for about 10 minutes via video Skype. He's the guy that broke it over at Natural News. And then I'm going to show you the high-def footage and audio of our crew with the chicken farmer on his own land. The city kept annexing areas, said you're not allowed to have chickens. He was loving the community, blew his house up. And the police told us you're not allowed to go in the city council building. Big, giant, Capitol-sized thing. That's all on tape. Before, it was just our reporters calling in, talking about it. They're now here. They're back, got back Saturday. And so we're going to premiere that coming up on the Nightly News. I'm going to get into the big attacks on the Internet. Don't think you can just use and have the Internet like it's always going to be here. I mean, I was reading the Cybersecurity Act that makes SOPA look tame, and it just says we'll do whatever we want. We'll shut your website down for any reason. Internet IDs, Cass Sunstein says, arrest people that disagree with man-made global warming. I mean, these are authoritarians. But they've learned the art to like pose as liberals or to pose as conservatives and act real friendly and have an ice cream cone like Warren Buffett does in most photo ops or be like talk with an NPR lisp. That is a Delphi technique. Well, that's a technique specifically of getting people to tell you what they think and then going, oh, we'll do what you want. You ask the crowd, what do you want? We want vanilla ice cream. And you go, well, I heard what you wanted. You want strawberry. But they just, as long as they say it in that I want to go to some calls with our guest, and by the way, we sell his book, Survivors. James Wesley Rawles, he's an expert, former Army intelligence captain, best-selling author, and he runs survivalblog.com as well. But I want to get your take on that, just the sickening psyop. Do you agree with me? I mean, I know it's their cover, but this whole non-threatening act they do to get you to comply, then if you don't, they sick the men in black uniforms on you. But it's just this whole non-threatening cover.
Yes, I agree. The modus operandi seems to be, it's what Mark from Michigan used to refer to as the iron fist in the velvet glove. And what we're seeing is the velvet glove. We're seeing, all this mamby-pamby, green revolution, kumbaya, all this whole mindset of global village, all plays together to try to put a happy face on tyranny.
That's it. Let's go to some phone calls. John in Texas, you're on the air with our guest. Go ahead.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Jones. Thank you for doing all that you do. Mr. Rawls, I have a few questions for you.
Sure, go ahead. One at a time, please.
Okay, one at a time. Thank you. A bit overwhelming. If I try to talk to my family and try to warn them about things that are going on, things that Mr. Jones talk about daily, and I get laughed at, they call me crazy. I show them documents that I print off from a printer and show them. One of my questions is, when would it be time to say, if it's not going to get any better, it's going to get much worse? When is it time for me to abandon my home and go somewhere else?
Wow,
I know you've already answered.
You don't want to give up a paying job in a down economy until you develop another income stream. My blog is all oriented toward encouraging people to move to lightly populated rural farming areas that are well removed from major population centers. But, that's not going to work for everybody. A lot of people have either family situations or work situations where they have to stay where they are. If you can develop another income stream or find a job in a lightly populated area, I recommend you go ahead and make the move now. But to throw away a good-paying job in today's down economy, I think, is foolish. You really don't want to make the move until you have another income.
Exactly. You want to start building with just the firearm, the water, being prepared, warning others to laugh at you now, not later, and then begin to start looking for areas where could I go somewhere rural, and even if the job pays less, it costs less to live there, and so just start developing a plan.
I agree wholeheartedly, and it's important that people think these things through, be prayerful about it, because you want to have God's guidance on this. And once you're committed, though, then go ahead. Then it's time to, go ahead, sell your house, make the move. And it's important to make a move fairly soon, because, I get so many emails from people who say, oh, well, I have this cabin prepared out in the woods in the Poconos or wherever, and I'll pull through just fine there. But people don't realize how long it takes to build up for self-sufficiency. You need to plant fruit and nut trees. That takes years. You need to practice gardening in that particular climate. That takes time and experience. You need to learn how to cook on a wood stove. You don't learn that sort of thing just overnight. So it's important that you make the move and start living. And
you need to meet the neighbors, because because you don't want to even really at first be a little friendly, but you're really just getting intelligence on them. You'll find out who's good, and you'll find out also who's a little global minion. And believe me, they're out there too.
Right, and if you don't want to be the expendable new guy, the guy who just blew into town at the 11th hour, just before everything fell apart, you want to become part of the community. You want to get involved in the local EMT or fire department, volunteer fire department, for example. It's important to be part of the community because you want to be seen as an insider, not an outsider.
Exactly. All right, God bless you. I hope that answers your excellent question, John. And what about people that are handicapped? What about, they are going to be in deep trouble.
Well, yeah, I get letters all the time from people who have sleep apnea, people who have chronic medical conditions. You need to plan ahead for all those. People who are diabetics, for example. A lot I get the same questions over and over again from people who are diabetic, for example. It's like, well, how do I keep my insulin cold? Well, do you have photovoltaics? Or do you have a good old-fashioned Cervell propane-powered refrigerator?
Or do you know how to go dig a 10-foot hole into the stone under your house to keep it cold in there?
Right, yeah. People need to think these things through. If they have particular medical needs, they need to plan for them. I mean, even just people who wear prescription glasses need to plan ahead. And there's places like Zenni Optical on the Internet, I've linked to them on my website, where you can literally buy 4 pairs of glasses for $30. People need to think through their own particular needs, to their own particular medical conditions, their own requirements, their own physical conditions, the climates that they can handle living in, and so forth. Think all these things through.
Yeah, just think about Katrina. The government can't and won't protect you. And if this country had 10 Katrinas at once, and that's kind of what a depression's like, it's just going to degenerate. I mean, you had many of the police there robbing local stores, folks. So in a lot of areas, obviously not like New Orleans, but, heaven help us. Because the government is trying to recruit either low-grade morons or criminals right now. And it's a big threat. Houston in Texas. That's kind of a pun. Welcome, Houston.
Yes, I got a question for him. I'm down here trucking right now, and I was going to see if he had any advice for truckers out here that say it went down right now, all electricity and all that went down. We couldn't get no fuel, no nothing, and we'd be, I'm running coast to coast, we'd be far from the house. So do you have any ideas what to do on that?
Well, in terms of planning ahead for fuel, I recommend that people buy the biggest propane tank they can find. If they have any vehicles that are diesel engined, put in a big diesel tank. There's really no point in putting in a huge gas tank for unleaded gasoline because it doesn't store more than 3 or 4 years tops, even with a stabilizer. But if you've got the budget, stock up on propane because it stores indefinitely. Stock up on diesel fuel because it'll store for 10-plus years. You want to add an antimicrobial like Pri-D to it to make it store better. But fuel storage is crucial, especially for people who live up in the northern states. If you don't have 3 or 4 cords of firewood stacked up, you're behind the power curve. You really need to.
Yeah, good old-fashioned wood is the way to go. And if everything starts crumbling, it's going to be hard to get the wood. So you need to get it now.
Yeah, and people need to think ahead in terms of having gasoline for their chainsaws and spare chains and gas stabilizer and especially 2-stroke oil for mixing chainsaw gas.
People will get this.
That's going to be like gold.
Absolutely. People that are obsessed with guns get obsessed about other things that you need to survive.
People should be just as obsessed about communications equipment, about first aid gear, about fuel storage, about gardening. They need to have that same level of interest because if you're only fixated on guns, you don't have a complete set of preparations. In fact, you're setting yourself up to be part of the problem because if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. Okay, and if you only have guns, you're going to end up being part of the problem. You're going to end up preying on your neighbors if you can't garden for your own food or raise your own livestock.
Yeah, that's really a terrible thing. It's what the studies that I know the U.S. Army's done them and other governments groups have done them. What is it? Within 7 days, most people without food become total criminals. Within 10 days, they start becoming just rampaging killers. And within 15, what is it, like 98% become cannibals?
It could come down to that, yes. That's one of the things I describe in my novel.
Yeah, and then, of course, films like The Road.
Unfortunately, if you really want to see human nature, The Road did a really good job of showing it at its real core. Because, I'm a Christian, and I'm going to do my very best to act in a Christian manner and be charitable to others. But when you come right down to it, if you peel back all the layers of civilization, what's underneath is what you saw in The Road. It's not very pretty underneath.
Yeah, see, I wouldn't kill people for myself, but I probably would for my children, I'll be honest. We're going to have a totally jam-packed final 30 minutes here in the next segment. Mike Adams pops in for about 10 minutes, then I'm going to premiere the footage they shot of the police, tell them they couldn't go in the building there in Roswell, Georgia. and some other incredible news. So much of it we never even get to on the air. It's all at Infowars.com and PrisonPlanet.com. In fact, the featured news is coming in so fast, I'm going to add a link saying top stories at the top of the site so that all the articles we're writing and the research goes there so people start clicking on that. Another thing is Infowars.com/feed. That's the RSS feed. That gets a lot of stuff that rolls off. We just got to re-engineer the site because there's so much information up there. And so many times an incredible article just goes away. Mr. Rawles, we were talking during the break, and you were discussing the IRA versus an American resistance and the difference is firearms. Briefly tell folks about that.
Sure. As I mentioned, in the peace process in Northern Ireland, a few years back, it all came down to just a few hundred guns when they were trying to decommission the IRA units. And we're talking 200 or 300 guns was all that it took to hold up the peace process. Here, by contrast, in the United States, we have millions of guns. In fact, more than 1 million being sold every month in the United States going into private hands.
I've seen numbers of over 5 million guns sold per month.
It's a huge number of guns. It's absolutely impossible to disarm the American people. And any globalist who has some fantasy of disarming the American people is absolutely deluded. It's never going to happen. Even if 95% or 98% of our population foolishly turned in their guns, there still would be more than enough guns to engage in a war of resistance here in the United States. So
well, let's say there's 200.
That's not my concern.
Let's say there's 200 million new guns. I mean, it's the last 20 years or so, but really it's more like 400 million. They estimate good working guns out there.
Right.
And let's say there's 160 million gun owners. It's growing. Let's say 1% decides to fight. We're talking about, what is that, 1,600,000 people? Yeah,
that's 4 times the size of our military. I mean, the numbers would be totally lopsided. And for a guerrilla warfare situation, you don't even have to fight at a 1-to-1 ratio. So there's absolutely no way that, and I describe this in my novel Patriots and in its sequel Survivors, there's no way that the American people could ever be disarmed. And even if there is an attempt to disarm them, they'll
I was about to say,
a war that can't be won. It'll be a guerrilla war that there's only one logical conclusion, one inevitable conclusion. That is that our constitutional republic will be restored.
Well, the enemy's using PSYOPs instead, but that's not working anymore. Congress has a 9% approval rating, and I don't ever want it to go to this, but let's say they arrest Alex Jones, disappear me. You know it's a hardcore tyranny. All this just continues. They start trying to come and pick people up. If you've got 1%, and it's going to be way more than that, I think it'll probably be 10% of gun owners at some point will resist. But if 1%, 1,600,000, went out and simply went after one bad guy, and then never were seen again. Boom. Talking about Mark Corney, he uses the moose hunting license. You have to get in a lottery just to maybe get the moose hunting license. It's not like, my point is they always show the military, all these weapons. Most of the military I talk to are awake and on our side more than the general public. And so this idea of, we can't fight the government if it comes to that, I don't want that, because the globalists will sit offshore and let the Civil War drag on. I would rather, with the truth, psyop them and get them to join reality. But if the system goes to some Soviet Russia type deal, this is not going to be like the NKVD and nobody would stand up to them, and Alexander Solzhenitsyn bemoaned that.
Yes, we have a different situation here in the States. Again, if a guerrilla war situation ever develops, God help anyone who tries to enforce tyranny on the United States. It won't last long.
Yeah, the system's set up all the tyranny now. They're just not fully implementing. They're kind of like waiting at the edge of a cliff.
Yeah, the bureaucratic approach, the incremental approach, seems to have been working for them. But if they try to implement anything in a hurry, there'll be a huge backlash.
But that's the issue. Even the incremental at a certain point hits a flashpoint, and it's coming to that.
I think we are approaching it, yes. Well, I'll be praying for all your listeners, Alex, that they put themselves in the right place at the right time with the right people.
Yeah, we didn't even get to many of the calls. Promise us in the next month or so you'll come back and just take calls.
Okay. I'll be happy to.
Let me say bye to you in the break. Folks, get his book at Infowars.com or at bookstores everywhere. Survivors, a novel of the coming collapse. Great to give this to friends and family to get them thinking. Available at Infowars.com or survivalblog.com. We'll be right back with Mike Adams and more. Ask yourselves, what are you doing in this time of great challenge? What are you doing to unlock minds? White House pushing it. I mean, I can just see the volatility. I've just been ranting while you've been on a hold about this IRS capital control and saying they're going to revoke your citizenship, basically, because that's what your passport is symbol of. It's a total right. I don't know of any culture that ever does that. On a case-by-case, for espionage, they take your passport. That's about it. Or when you're already out on bond. So they're saying, basically, you're all prisoners. And, of course, it'll be expanded. James Wesley Rawles, what do you make of this and all the other craziness, sir?
Well, we're living in very dangerous times. And when I saw the news reports about the IRS threatening to take people's passports, actually what popped into my mind was Jonestown and Jim Jones taking away all of the people at the camp's passports and locking them up in a couple of footlockers. We're verging on a society that's a police state at this point, and people need to wake up and they need to get themselves prepared. If they're going to move overseas, they should take the gap soon. If they're going to hunker down here in the States, they need to get their beans, bullets, and Band-Aids squared away now, because those windows of opportunity are closing.
I hear you. Are you getting chills? I mean, and by chills, I mean, 10 years ago, I would feel the urgency a little bit. Now, it's blowing me away.
Well, the immediacy of it, I think, is almost overwhelming at this point. When I first drafted my first novel, Patriots, back in 1990, 1991.
6 silver coins, little ones. Computer programmer. And he was going to Vegas to a coin show. And they weren't even very valuable. He was just going to, trade them and stuff. And I saw them. They were just U.S. silver rounds, worth like $35 at the time. And they were going to take them. So I saw them as I was going through Austin. They're now asking people about their diamond rings, their necklaces. They're downloading people's laptops. This is a prison induction. They're just getting you ready. Now I'm going to shut up and go to our guest. But I'm really freaked out about this because it's passed the Senate. It's now in the House, and the ATF, I was told this a month before the letter went out last year. I was the first to break the letter, just pointing out that we have sources. The ATF is now going to tell people that you can't sell semi-autos anymore. That is, they're discussing it next year. The NRA says they've gotten word that, quote, there's big gun control next year if Obama gets elected. The point is that I was told that they were going to tell people don't sell more than 2 guns to somebody in these 4 western states, Texas to California. And if you do, you've got to call the ATF, as if they don't already have a record of that through NICS. The point is it's getting you used to doing what you're told outside of law. Now, James, I didn't really tell you even when I was going to get you on about today. I just wanted to pick your brain about current events and talk about your research, but being in Army intelligence, seeing what's happening, I talk to military and police. A lot of them are finally waking up. But I see the system creating a cult of the military and the police, who they could care less about, taking their pension funds, you name it, to wear as a mantle around the tyranny ahead of trying to start some new civil war in this country. They tried to start the race war with the Trayvon Martin thing, but people aren't buying that. NBC editing the tape. The no-fly list will be expanded to a no-work list, a no-buy-sell list with the digital photo. You'll still be able to use cash, but it'll be connected to a digital photo in all transactions and an internet ID on online purchases, and that's in the Cybersecurity Act they're trying to pass right now. CISPA. I mean, I'm getting chills every 5 seconds now, okay? Because I knew it was all coming. I read it from their own documents, but it is a total banker infiltration of the preachers, the police, the military, the media, the entire culture, and Forbes and Fox. And I've even heard national hosts going, better pay those taxes. or you're not going to be able to fly out of the country and go on that vacation. Folks, this is capital controls. This is right out of Nazi Germany, right out of Soviet Russia. I mean, this is one of the big hallmarks. Definition of capital control: any measure taken by a government, central bank, or other regulatory body to limit the flow of foreign capital in and out of domestic economy. But this is even worse. They don't want a grassroots economy, so they're putting a capital control on that. That's why even Forbes said, why are they raiding thousands of lemonade stands? Why are they attacking peaceful protesters? Why? Why are they? Because it's here, folks. As well as market-based forces, capital controls can affect many asset classes, such as equities, bonds, foreign exchange trades. Tight capital controls are often found in developing countries where the capital reserves are lower and more susceptible to volatility. It means when they're devaluing a currency is one of the big ones. Now, that's from Investopedia. That's their definition of it. I have flown and seen it. It's been in the news. I did an interview with a guy. And that's the word. That's why all the big money people, even the globalists themselves, have been getting their money out of the country and buying armored redoubts or digging in here in the country. And all these elitists are building, you know, these 5, 10, 20, some cases $30 million armored subterranean homes with, you know, machine gun turrets. Why are they doing this? Because they've done a great job at carrying out this Agenda 21 resource war of deindustrializing the West, getting us into debt, signing us onto their derivatives, and getting ready to fully implode the country. And as we slide into depression, they keep telling us everything's fine, everything's fine, everything's wonderful, as the crime rate increases, as all of this happens. But the good news is, between 5 and 7 million, because it varies month to month, previously, the record was like 2 million guns in a month, was the record month a few years ago. Now it's over 5 million guns a month. Many big manufacturers have announced they are suspending new orders for 6 months to a year. Small manufacturers are making the same announcement because they're so behind on orders. The government's buying giant armored vehicles, hundreds of millions of rounds a month, 400 and something million this month, 300 million that month, 200 million this month, digging in. They've got the preachers and clergy response teams brainwashing their flocks, submit to government with what's coming, do what you're told, take the shots. Government's now shooting kids up without parental consent. Yeah. Again, they're doing whatever they want, and they're announcing, we'll secretly arrest you if we want. We'll disappear you. You're not going to be able to fly out of the country if the IRS says you haven't paid. No judge, no jury. We're going to put you on a no-gun buy list. No judge, no jury, no crime, if you're on the no-fly list. And I've told you for over 10 years, because they were already talking about it even before 9/11. Best-selling author James Wesley Rawles. He's written fiction, nonfiction. He's got a lot of amazing insights into things. And, of course, he was also, in Army intelligence. Held a top-secret security clearance with a special background investigation, access-sensitive, compartmentalized information. He was awarded officer, specialty 35A, tactical all-source intelligence officer. I'll go through all of his interesting bio here. He was a captain in Army intelligence, just to give you the short end of it. He'll be with us to talk about preparation for the engineered collapse that the Agenda 21 globalists have been carrying out. But you know that for the last hour plus, I have been beside myself with the fact that capital controls are being implemented on the U.S. And I was told now 3 years ago that John Wayne's family was leaving the country. By John Wayne's, I'm going to just leave it at that. And by countless other wealthy people, powerful people. I talked to a lady who's one of the biggest defense contractor owners in the world, worth billions. She left the country 4 years ago. I've told you about that over and over again. And they said, look, you won't be able to get anything out of the country if you don't leave in the next few years.